We are live.
Hello, everyone. We'll give you a few minutes to get in and get settled, but we're excited to have you joining us today at ProductTank Exeter. We'll just give you, like I said, a few moments to join us.
Know any good jokes?
I don't think any are appropriate.
Okay, well, let's steer clear then. This is recorded on YouTube, so
yeah, this could go down in my record.
yeah.
I think we can probably give it
let's
a setup anyway. So yes, welcome to ProductTank Exeter this evening. It's evening here, but I think Teresa, it's morning with you. So it's nice to and we get a lot of people from all over the place. So hopefully we've got some of you joining us from all sorts of places. We are based in sunny Devon in the UK, which is a lovely little part of the world. We've got we're quite a cool place in terms of tech. We've got and product in general. We've got lots of innovative startups, but also some fairly major companies down here, such as our National Weather Service and things like that based down here. So in case you're not already aware, ProductTank is the world's largest product community. We're based in loads of different locations across the world, and they're entirely run by volunteers. So wherever you're based, you can probably find a ProductTank somewhere nearby. It's come out of Mind the Product, which is fantastic for product professionals to get access to talks and resources. And these are really great if you're looking to kind of advance in your product career or get in touch with like-minded individuals. There's loads of really awesome things that you can get involved with in Mind the Product. So I do say if you can get involved, then it's really helpful. You can either speak at a product tank, like Teresa is doing today. You can host or sponsor a product tank. You can also write for mindtheproduct.com, or you can just become a Mind the Product member for access to content and to join a fantastic network of loads of really passionate product people. So I do recommend that you can do that if you can. So we are delighted to be joined this evening by Teresa Torres. Now I'll let Teresa tell you a little bit more about her and her history, but she is an internationally acclaimed author, speaker, coach, and her book Continuous Discovery Habits was released in paperback in April this year, I think, and is a fantastic way to learn a really structured and sustainable approach to discovery. So I will hand over to you, Teresa.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm excited to be here. Am I going to get my slides?
You will. I was just thinking, Hannah, if I've got a question, how do I ask Teresa my question?
That is a very good point. If you were to have a question, you could go to Slido, slide.do, SLI.do, and you can use the code PTX, PTEXE. And there you can drop the questions in for Teresa. Thanks, Dave.
That's all right. No, that's cool. Yeah, we'll be doing a Q&A section later, so please do chuck your questions in. You can also vote on questions that you're really interested to have us pitch to Teresa. And if all else fails, also chuck in questions in YouTube. We're not exclusive, but Slido does at least mean that we can vote on them, which is nice. And it's great to see people chucking in comments as well, saying where they're from. So that's really cool. Please do continue that. I'm going to shut up and present Teresa's slides.
All right, thank you. I'm going to give a shout out to Keith from Boise, Idaho, because that is very close to Bend, Oregon, and I was just there. So shout out to Keith. Thanks for joining us. All right. Welcome to the what and why of continuous discovery. As Hannah mentioned, I'm Teresa Torres. I work as a product discovery coach. And one of the things I like to share is that I've had a chance to work with teams all over the world. Some startups as small as 2 people founding teams to large multinational companies with hundreds of thousands of employees in a wide variety of industries. And the reason why I like to share that at the beginning of the talk is because I know what it's like to sit and listen to a talk and think, this will never work in my context. That's great that it works for the Amazons and the Netflix of the world. Here's why my organization is unique. So here's what I want to start with and just address right away is that this framework has been used in a lot of different contexts. Odds are many elements of it will work in yours. So I want to encourage you to just kind of flip that thinking on its head a little bit and start to think about how might some of these ideas work in my organizational context. And if we as we get into the Q&A, I would love to hear what are the sort of obstacles and hurdles that you think you're facing to try to adopt some of these practices. All right, so let's start at the very beginning. If you've seen me speak before, I always start with this slide. I promise we will get into more advanced topics shortly. What do we mean by discovery? So we talk about discovery as representing the work that we do to make decisions about what to build. And we contrast this with delivery, which is the work that we're doing to build, ship, and maintain a production quality product. The reason why this distinction is becoming so important is because a lot of companies put a ton of emphasis on delivery, and we often forget to equally emphasize discovery. The other trend that we're seeing is that more and more companies are integrating the customer into their discovery process. And we're seeing a big shift from a project mindset to this type of work to a continuous mindset. And that's really what we're going to get into today. So a project mindset, most of us grew up in a project world. We resource projects during our annual budgeting process. When we kick off a project, if we're lucky, we go talk to some customers and do a bunch of research. Throughout the project, we rely on that research. And then maybe, again, if we're lucky, at the end of the project, we validate, did we get it right? We create prototypes to validate, did we get the design right? We do A/B testing to validate, did we get the delivery right? The first thing I will say is there is nothing wrong with project-based discovery. However, what we're seeing is a shift to a more continuous cadence, and that's because we're recognizing that in the digital world, we don't work on projects, we work on evergreen products. And what I mean by that is when you ship something, you're never done, right? We always are iterating, we're always improving, our product is always evolving, and that's pushing for teams to move to more of a continuous delivery cadence, and then we're matching that with a continuous discovery cadence. So I want to start with my definition of continuous discovery. I like to see teams at a minimum do weekly touch points with customers. And this is by the team that's building the product, where they're conducting small research activities in pursuit of a desired product outcome. Now there's a lot to this definition. And so we're actually going to, over the course of the talk, break it down line by line and really help you understand, get a clear picture of what does this look like in practice. So let's start with weekly touch points with customers. So why is this weekly cadence important? As product people, we're making product decisions every day. Some of them are big strategic decisions like what elements should go on our roadmap, what outcomes should we go after, which customers should we serve. Others are more just everyday decisions like what do we label this button? How do we expose this feature in the interface? How should the underlying data model work? Most of us know to do some research for those big strategic decisions. What we often forget is that those daily decisions can also benefit from customer input. And here's the reason why. As product people, we've developed deep expertise in how our product works, right? We know what functionality is available. We know where all of it lives in the interface. We know what the underlying data model can support. Our customers don't share that expertise. They don't know our products inside and out like we do. And the challenge with having expertise that our customers don't have is that we suffer from a bias called the curse of knowledge. The curse of knowledge basically says that when we develop expert knowledge, we can no longer remember what it was like to not have that knowledge. And so the problem is, as we make these daily decisions, we're making them from our expert point of view, and we're forgetting what it's like to be in our customers' shoes, where they have a lot less knowledge about how our product works. And so the easiest way to overcome this bias is just to engage with your customers more frequently. Every time you engage with a customer, you're creating an opportunity to expose the gap between how you think about the product and how your customers think about the product. And most of us, when we see that gap, we're motivated to close it, right? To shift our thinking, to change our decisions, to work better for our customers. There's another advantage to this cadence. So most of us do what I call validation research. We do all the design work, all the pixel perfect production quality design work before we put it in front of a customer and usability test it or prototype test it. We do all the delivery before we A/B test it to validate, did we get it right? Validation research matters, and it definitely plays a role in our discovery process. But if we get feedback much earlier in the process, when we're still deciding what problems to solve, what opportunities to go after, when we have pencil sketches and half-baked ideas, when we engage with our customers at those points in the process, we start to develop what I call a co-creation mindset. And co-creation is a really important idea because if we get feedback on half-baked ideas, it's a lot easier to change a half-baked idea than it is to change a pixel-perfect design or to change something that we A/B tested. So we're getting feedback earlier in the process, and it's going to increase the likelihood that we're able to act on it. So this cadence, this weekly cadence of engaging with customers is doing two things. It's helping us overcome the curse of knowledge, where we can see the gap between how we think about our product and how our customers think about the product. And two, it's helping us to adopt more of a co-creation mindset, which is going to make it easier and less expensive to integrate our customers' feedback, which is going to lead to better solutions. Now, for those of you that maybe rarely talk to a customer or you talk to customers quarterly, this weekly cadence might sound overwhelming. I want you to take a continuous improvement mindset to reaching this frequency. So if you've never talked to a customer, just start with find a customer to talk to. If you talk to customers quarterly, try to get to monthly. If you're talking to them monthly, try to get to every other week. So don't set the expectation next week that you have to be perfect. Just think about this as a benchmark to aspire to and see if you can iterate your way there by making next week a little bit better than last week. Okay, let's talk about the second line. So we're engaging with customers. Who's doing that? It's really important that this be the team who's building the product. There's this big misconception that we have a discovery team and a delivery team. And what I want to make really clear, the team that is building the product is the same team that's doing discovery. And it starts with this idea of a product trio. So a product trio is typically comprised of a product manager, a designer, and a software engineer. And the idea is that they're jointly responsible for making decisions about what to build. So they're driving discovery as a team. This is very different from what we've historically done, right? Historically, we've worked in a waterfall model. Even if you're doing Scrum, most of us are doing mini waterfall, where the product manager writes requirements, hands them off to the designer, who hands the requirements and the designs off to the engineers. The problem with these handoffs is it creates a ton of rework. The designer gets requirements that they can't design to, so we have to go back and rewrite requirements. The engineers get requirements and designs they can't implement. We got to go back and rewrite requirements and redo the design. What we're learning is that if we have these three roles collaborate from the very beginning, we end up with better solutions. We end up with fewer handoffs. We end up with less rework. Our delivery goes faster because our engineers have the context they need to make better daily decisions as they implement our products. Now, most of us have more than 3 people on our team. You probably have additional engineers. Depending on your DevOps strategy, you might have a QA person on your team. Depending on how you interface with the rest of the business, you might have a data analyst or a product marketing manager or a customer success person on your team. If you have the luxury of having a user researcher on your team, that's phenomenal. There's actually 100 roles I could have put on this slide. I'm not trying to exclude anybody. Here's the idea. It's not that the trio is the only part of the team that's doing discovery. It's that the trio is leading discovery and they're engaging with the rest of the team as they need their expertise. So for example, if you're doing discovery on your go-to-market strategy, you're probably pulling in your product marketing manager to be a part of that discovery. So this idea of the trio flexes. It can flex based on the roles on your team. It can flex based on the decisions that you're making. What we're looking for is what's the smallest cross-functional group where the expertise needed for the decision is represented. But we don't want to include everybody in every decision because that will slow us way down and we'll never get to the point where we're shipping value to our customers. So the idea of the trio is to trade off speed of decision-making with quality of decision-making. The smaller the decision-making team, the faster you'll go. The more roles represented, the more expertise you'll get to draw from. So we're trying to find that right balance. Now, if this team is responsible for making decisions about what to build, this is the team that's suffering from the curse of knowledge that needs to have firsthand exposure to customers to make sure they're closing that gap. And this is why in this definition, we're talking about weekly touch points with customers by the team building the product. So we want to see that product trio engaging with customers. Now, the second half of this definition is where we're going to get into the bulk of the talk. So the trio's engaging with customers every week. What are they doing? Their goal is to conduct small research activities in pursuit of a desired product outcome. Now, both these lines are pretty important. We can't take our old project-based research methods and try to do them on a weekly cadence. That's just not sustainable, right? We also don't want to just do research indefinitely, research for research's sake. Our goal is to drive outcomes, right? So we need to make sure that our research is in service of driving an outcome. So the way to help align these things, I like to use this visual. It's called an opportunity solution tree. If you're new to this, we're going to walk through this. This visual, I designed it to help a team chart the best path to their desired outcome. So let's start by talking about desired outcomes. A good discovery team is outcome focused. So instead of starting with a fixed roadmap where they're saying build these explicit features, they're starting with what's the impact of what's the impact we need, and they're looking at what can we build to have that impact. This is really a critical distinction that we're seeing propagate across the industry, is because companies are starting to realize we can't predict the future. We can't predict right now what we should be building 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now. We're recognizing that our initial ideas are often wrong, that it takes iteration and experimentation. So instead of prescribing outputs, we're saying, look, we don't know what you should build. We just know we expect it to have this impact. So focus on driving this outcome. Now, 2020 was a tough year for a lot of us, but I think one of the silver linings is this simple. The whole world got a giant dose of what it looks like to face an uncertain future, right? A lot of companies, their roadmaps had to be thrown away, had to be radically shifted. Here's the reality. We're always operating under this uncertainty. Hopefully it's not as extreme as a global pandemic in the future, but we always see new competitors enter the market. We always see technology shift the landscape. Even our own releases have an impact, right? Every time we ship something, we're impacting the opportunity space. We're changing customer needs. So part of this outcome focus is really acknowledging the future is uncertain. How do we get better at getting clarity around what we're trying to deliver without prescribing outputs? So I'll give an example of this. I like to use Netflix in my examples, not because they sponsor me or because I've worked with them. I have not. It's simply because people around the world are familiar with Netflix, so it's an accessible example. If I work at Netflix, instead of saying, hey, build these 7 features and deliver them by this date, that's that old output world, we're looking at what's the impact of the features we need to have, and we're making a business decision. We need to increase subscriber retention. So maybe our business need is we want to increase the lifetime value of a customer. We're going to set an outcome of increasing subscriber retention. The product team then wants to translate that outcome to a behavior in the product. And so they might say, we think we can increase retention by focusing on increasing viewer engagement. So they're going to set that outcome of increasing viewer engagement. Once that's in place, they now want to discover the opportunities that might drive that outcome. So the outcome is where we're looking at business value. Opportunities are where we're looking at customer value. So an opportunity is a customer need, a customer pain point, or a customer desire. So we're looking at what needs, pain points, and desires that if we addressed them would drive our business value. So what this visual is doing, even though it looks really simple, it's aligning customer value with business value. And then, of course, we do have to discover the solutions that would address those opportunities in a way that would drive our outcomes. So let's look at how do we build this out? What is our product trio actually doing? So as I mentioned, it does start with setting a good outcome. This should be a two-way negotiation between your product leader, that's your chief product officer, your vice president of product. If you work at a large company, it might be the general manager of your business unit. That person is communicating the business value. So in the Netflix example, it's as simple as increased subscriber retention. The product trio needs to translate that to a product outcome. So we're measuring a behavior that's occurring in the product. And so in the Netflix example, it would be increasing viewer minutes, right? Increasing the average minutes somebody watches Netflix. Once that outcome is in place, we now want to start our weekly cadence of engaging with customers. The first small research activity we're going to do is every week we're going to interview. Now, a lot of teams think about interviewing as a way to evaluate solutions. I want you to think about interviewing as a way to discover opportunities. So we're interviewing to discover customer needs, pain points, and desires so we can get a big picture view of how we might reach our outcome. Now, the reason why most teams don't interview every week is because finding a customer to talk to is not easy, right? Recruiting is a hustle. So what I encourage teams to do is to automate their recruiting process. What I want to see here is I want you to show up to work on Monday, whether it's in your office or virtually from your home, look at your calendar and see that there's already an interview on your schedule without you having to do anything to get it there. It's like magic. I'm going to give you the 3 most common ways to do this. The first is to recruit people while they're using your product or service. For 80% of you, this is going to be your primary method. So if you work at a B2C company, this is how you should be automating your recruiting. If you work at a B2B company and you need to interview end users, this is how you should be automating your recruiting process. Capture your customers' attention while they're already in your product or service. Now, if you work at a B2B company and you need to talk to buyers, you can use your customer-facing teams to help you recruit. These are your sales teams, your account management teams, your support teams. Anybody whose job it is to already be on the phone with customers all day, every day, you can define triggers for them that basically says, if you talk to a customer who has this need, schedule an interview with our product team. For 98% of you, one of these 2 methods is going to help you automate your recruiting process. This covers B2C, it covers B2B end users, it covers B2B buyers. Who's the 2% that's in our exceptions? First of all of you are going to think you're in the 2%. I promise you the vast majority of you are not. The people that fall in the 2% are when your customers are extremely high value time people. So think about Fortune 500 CEOs. Think about respiratory ICU physicians and nurses during the height of COVID, right? People that are not going to just be browsing your product and say, sure, I'll talk to you. In those instances, you want to set up a customer advisory board. Some people call these design partners, where you're building long-term relationships with a subset of your customers to make it a little bit easier to get access to high-value people. So the idea here is you're not engaging with them as a focus group, because focus groups really require a well-trained facilitator. Instead, you're inviting your partners to do one-on-one interviews with your product teams. So if you have 3 product teams, you might invite 12 customers to be part of your customer advisory board. That gives each of your 3 product teams a customer to talk to every week. The vast majority of teams that I work with have had success automating their recruiting process using one of these 3 methods. Once you've automated your recruiting process, we now need to talk about how do you ask the right questions. The biggest mistake that I see people make in interviews is they ask speculative questions. So if I work at Netflix, what are some of the things I might want to know about you? What do you like to watch? What device do you watch on? Who do you watch with? How do you decide what to watch? How often do you watch? These are all the things I want to know. These are my research questions. However, I don't want to just ask you these questions, because these questions are asking you to speculate about your behavior. And the problem with this is that all human beings suffer from cognitive biases, where our brains come up with fast answers, but our answers don't necessarily reflect our behavior in reality. So we need to craft better interview questions. And the key to this is to focus on collecting specific stories. So instead of asking, what do you like to watch? I'm going to ask you, tell me about the last time you watched Netflix. And I'm going to listen for, what did you watch? It's a very subtle difference, but in the first case, cognitive biases are going to result in you getting unreliable feedback. In the second case, grounded in a specific story, you're going to actually learn about their actual behavior. The other benefit of stories is you will start to hear needs, pain points, and desires emerge from stories. That's going to allow us to map out the opportunity space and look for what are the opportunities that we might address to drive our outcome. Now, I really encourage teams to work with one small opportunity at a time. This is what starts to unlock a continuous cadence. So we identify the first customer need, pain point, or desire to work through. And then what I want you to do is to generate a set of solutions to work with. This is counter to what most teams do. Most teams work with one idea at a time. We hear about a customer problem, we jump to our first solution. Maybe we do all the right discovery activities, we prototype, we test, but we're framing the question as, is this idea good or not? Decision-making researchers tell us this is a poor framing. It exacerbates two cognitive biases. The first is the escalation to commitment. The more time we spend with an idea, the more we identify with the idea, the more we fall in love with the idea, which exacerbates the second bias, which is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias says we're going to notice the evidence that supports our ideas, and we're not going to notice the evidence that suggests our idea is flawed. And this is a really important bias to understand. I know most of you are probably familiar with it, but here's what it means. It means you could be doing all the right discovery activities. You could be running tests, you could be prototype testing, you could be collecting qualitative feedback, but you're not even going to notice the negative feedback. So it's not that you're ignoring it, it's not that you're not being a good experimental thinker, it's that you're not even going to notice it. So you could be doing all the right activities and getting none of the benefit. The easiest way to counteract both of these biases is to set up what's called a compare and contrast decision. So we want to say, which of these ideas look best? So when we're working with an opportunity, I want you to work with at least 3 ideas and compare and contrast them against each other. This is an important enough concept that I'm going to leave you with a visual. This is Usain Bolt. He was at one point the world's fastest runner. If you saw him running around a track by himself and I asked you, is he fast? I want you to hear a whether or not question. Is he fast or not? The problem with this is fast is not an absolute trait. It's relative. Is he fast relative to a cheetah? Probably not. Is he fast relative to a Tesla? In the first 100 meters, I would pay to see that race. Is he fast relative to other humans? Absolutely. So what we're seeing on the right is a clear compare and contrast decision. And when we're testing our ideas, this is what we're looking for. We're looking for a clear front runner. Now, the reason why most of us don't do this is we can't take our project-based research methods and do them for 3 different ideas. We can't create 3 pixel perfect production quality prototypes to get feedback on our designs. We don't have time to do all the design work before we know which idea we might pursue. We can't build all 3 ideas and A/B test them. So what we need to do is we need to make our research activities smaller.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
We need to, sorry, Siri started talking to me on my watch, which was fantastic. Okay, so we need to make our research activities smaller so that we can compare and contrast our solutions against each other. And this is not a new idea. The way we're going to do this is we're going to take our ideas and break them down into their underlying assumptions. Now, the reason why we don't do this today, even though it's an old idea, is because it's hard to see our own assumptions. So I want to help you with a very clear example. I want you to imagine we interviewed a bunch of Netflix users and the biggest need that they came up with over and over again was, I want to watch sports. So Netflix is fairly good at TV shows and movies, not very good at sports. We want to set up a good compare and contrast. We generate 3 solutions. The first is we can integrate local channels. Here in the US, that's ABC, CBS, and NBC. In the UK, that might be BBC, and I don't know if you have other local channels. The idea here is sports are often on local channels. Let's integrate those local channels. We'll solve the sports problem. Second idea, we can partner directly with sports leagues like we do with movie studios and license their games. So right now I know Euro Cup is happening. We can work with the Euro Cup organization and say, let's license your games so we can show them directly in Netflix. The third solution might be, we're Netflix, we're not good at sports, so let's partner with somebody who is. Fubo TV is fairly good at sports. Let's bundle a Fubo TV subscription with a Netflix subscription. Okay, so we have 3 ideas. We want to break them down into their underlying assumptions. So what do I mean by that? You've probably seen this Venn diagram. We talk about we want our products to be desirable, viable, and feasible. These are also the categories where we tend to make a lot of assumptions. So with desirability, does anybody want it? We're assuming, why do people want it? We're also assuming our customers will do what we need them to do to get value from the solution. Viability, we're assuming it's good for our business. If we're an outcome-focused team, we're assuming it will drive our outcome. Feasibility, can we build it? We're assuming it's possible. I'm going to add 2 categories. Usability, can anybody use it? Can they find it? Are they able to do what we need them to do? And ethical assumptions, is there any potential harm? This last category we're pretty bad at as an industry. This is where we need to be looking at things like, what data are we collecting? Are we storing it safely? Are we selling it to third parties? How are they using it? Do our customers understand that? Are they comfortable with it? A whole nother category here in ethical assumptions is who are we including? Who are we leaving out? We're seeing a lot of examples where we're replicating the social inequities in our communities into our products. Our ethical assumptions can help us surface that and start to mitigate some of that. Knowing these 5 categories will help you generate assumptions, but for most of us, it's not enough. It's still hard to see our assumptions. So I'm going to give you a strategy to help you generate assumptions. It starts with story mapping your ideas. Now, if you're new to story mapping, the story map is the yellow boxes on this slide. What we're going to do is we're going to assume that our solution already exists, and we're story mapping what our customer needs to do to get value from the idea. So in this case, we're integrating local channels into Netflix. What does our customer need to do to get value from it? They need to decide they want to watch the game. They need to choose a streaming service. Hopefully they choose Netflix. They want to open the streaming service. They need to find the local channel, and then they need to watch the game. Now, the value of this is if I look at the gray boxes below, I'm starting to generate assumptions by asking what needs to be true for my subscriber to do each step in my story map. So for this first step, they need to decide to watch the game. What needs to be true? Well, our subscribers need to be sports fans. They have to want to watch sports. For this second step, what needs to be true? They have to know that there's sports on Netflix. They have to want to watch sports on Netflix. For this fourth step, they have to know what channel the game is on, right? If we're integrating local channels and we're not integrating the games themselves, the solution's not going to work for them if they don't know that the game is on a local channel. We have to be able to partner with the local channels. And in the US, I don't know if this is true in the UK, but we have all these archaic regional broadcasting rights. So you might get the channel, but the game is blacked out in your region. And it's usually tied to local ticket sales. If the game doesn't sell out, you can't get it on TV. So you can see the story map is helping us generate assumptions. And the other value of this, some of these assumptions, the assumptions over here on the left, are going to be shared across all 3 of our ideas. And if it turns out one of those assumptions isn't true, we're going to rule out a set of solutions. So you're going to get value out of when we test a single assumption, we start to learn about a set of solutions. When we get over here to the 4th column, these assumptions are differentiating our ideas. And when we test these assumptions, we're going to collect compare and contrast data. And the value of this is testing assumptions is a lot faster than testing whole ideas. So I'm going to give you briefly 4 ways to test your assumptions. The first, I'm losing my mouse here. The first is we're going to prototype to test an assumption. The difference here is we're not doing pixel perfect production quality whole solution prototyping. We're prototyping just the specific moment that we need to test the assumption. So if we were trying to test the assumption our subscribers want to watch sports, I don't need to prototype any part of the interface whatsoever. I just need to put a prompt in front of somebody that includes TV shows, movies, and sporting events, and ask them, what would you like to watch right now? And if some of my subscribers want to watch sports, I would suspect that that would help me validate that I do have sports fans in my audience. Now, if I have access to an unmoderated testing tool, I can design this and get feedback in a single day. And because my test is teeny tiny, I'm not getting 10, 15-minute videos to watch, which is going to take 3 hours to process. I'm getting 2-minute videos that I can process in half an hour. So by focusing on a very specific moment and testing a very specific assumption, it's faster to launch our tests, it's faster to process our tests. The second way we could test this assumption is with a 1-question survey. Now, 1-question surveys, here's the key. They need to live within your product or service, so you cannot interrupt the workflow of your customer. So you can't send them off to an external survey with 17 questions. You're not going to get very many responses. The value of a one-question survey is it takes 2 seconds to fill out, and it doesn't interrupt their flow. So you're going to want to use a tool like Intercom or Ethnio or Qualaroo, where you can just pop up a little box right in the flow. The second thing to know about one-question surveys is surveys get a bad rep, and for good reason. It's hard to write a good survey question. We need to remember everything we just talked about with interviewing. I don't want you to ask speculative questions, so I'm not going to ask, do you watch sports? Because if you ever watched a sporting event in your entire life, you're going to say yes, and that's not a very reliable answer. So I'm going to ask about a specific instance in the past. Have you watched a sporting event in the past week? And I can make this even better that when they say yes, I can follow up with, what was it? And the reason why that follow-up is important is because they might type in, I watched a billiards tournament. And if I don't consider billiards a sport, I want to throw that answer out, right? So most teams can launch a one-question survey and get results in an hour or two, or or at most a day or two. This is a very fast way to collect feedback on your assumptions. The third way we can test this assumption is to look and see if our customers are already exhibiting the behavior we would expect to see. So how do we look at customer behavior? We can look at our usage analytics. We can look at our support tickets. We can talk to our sales teams. What we want to do is we want to start with our assumption and say, if this assumption were true, what would we expect to see in the data we already have? And so in Netflix case, we might say, well, if we already have subscribers who are sports fans, maybe they're already searching for sports on Netflix. So this is where we could go look at our search queries and see if any of them are related to sports. Okay, for the vast majority of your assumptions, prototyping a specific moment and combining it with unmoderated user testing, one-question surveys, data mining, these are fast ways to, in a couple hours or a day or two, to rapidly test assumptions. The fourth way is going to be really good for feasibility assumptions. We often have to give our engineers time to do what's called a research spike. This is where we give them a couple days to go investigate something. Now, just like we're not prototyping the whole solution, we're not going to ask our engineers to investigate what it would take to implement the whole solution. We're going to give them a much more targeted task. So if we stick with our Netflix example, maybe we want to integrate local channels, but we have a feasibility concern. Does the channel give us enough metadata about what's on TV right now? Can we display the name of the event? Can we display the description? Can we display an image that represents the game? What we might do with this research spike is say, engineers, go test the assumption that the local channel will give us the proper data, pull the last 25 events, try to display them in our interface, and see if it works. So we're still doing targeted testing. What this allows us to do is it allows us to start the week on Monday with a set of solutions, and by the end of the week, start to collect some data that allows us to set up a good compare and contrast decision, where we're looking for a clear front runner. What this means is that a product team each week, again, they're doing small research activities week over week. They're interviewing every week to explore the opportunity space, and they're assumption testing every week to evaluate solutions. Now, we just covered a lot of ground very quickly, so I want to do a brief recap before we move into Q&A. So first, we started with setting an outcome at the top of our tree. Then we started interviewing every week to discover opportunities. This is not something we do at the beginning of the project. It's something we do continuously because the opportunity space is always shifting. So we want to keep our ear to the ground, make sure we understand current needs, pain points, and desires. When we choose a target opportunity, we're going to work with a set of solutions. We're going to break them down into their underlying assumptions, and we're going to rapidly test those assumptions so we can collect good compare and contrast data. Now, I know I covered a ton of ground. If you're curious about any of these ideas, I did release a book last month called Continuous Discovery Habits. I wrote this book to be a Product Trio's guide for putting this process into practice. There's practical activities you can do with your teams. Every chapter has anti-patterns of things to avoid. If you are excited about the ideas that you heard and you want to learn how to work this way, I strongly recommend checking this out. All right, Dave and Hannah, I think we're ready for Q&A.
Much. That was fantastic. Thanks, Teresa.
Thank you.
We've got
Amazing.
loads of questions come in, which is fantastic. People have been asking through. So yeah, we've got those shared on the screen as well. So we'll just kick off, I reckon. So the first question that we'd love to ask is, how do outcomes and opportunities relate or not relate to OKRs in your thoughts?
Yeah, really common question. So OKR stands for objectives and key results. It's really a format for goal setting, right? So an objective is a qualitative goal that should be inspiring, like become the #1 browser in China. Key results are your quantitative metrics that measure progress, towards that objective. So how do we know we're going to be the #1 browser in China? We're going to look at customer acquisition, retention, adoption of using our browser over time. In my world, when I talk about an outcome at the top of the tree, it should be a quantitative outcome. So it's mapping to a key result. Now, if you have one objective and 3 key results, in the proper way of using OKRs, those 3 key results should be trying to measure the same thing, that objective. You don't need 3 opportunity solution trees. You can have 1 opportunity solution tree. I do see a lot of teams have key results that all measure very different things, in which case I would prioritize and work one at a time.
Awesome.
Cool.
So the next one, you focus really in your book about picking up one opportunity at a time. You mentioned that in the talk earlier. How do you think about, especially in the initial MVP, thinking about multiple opportunities?
Yeah, so working on one opportunity at a time doesn't mean releasing one opportunity at a time. So there's 2 different activities here. So the reason why I encourage you to focus on one opportunity at a time is because it's going to give you the space you need to generate multiple solutions, to run several assumption tests in parallel, and to really collect that compare and contrast data. However, in practice, once you're ramped up working this way, you might be, while you're assumption testing and evaluating solutions for one opportunity, you might realize that another opportunity is starting to come up frequently in your interviews, and you're queuing that to be your next opportunity. So it's not, think about it almost like a Kanban flow, like you have one opportunity that's your work in progress, but you're already starting to get a sense of which opportunity is coming after that. And then as far as releasing, you might decide a single opportunity offers enough value to just go ahead and ship it to customers. And when you have a mature product, that is often the case because you're augmenting a product. When you're a brand new product, you might say, okay, we're going to work on one opportunity at a time, but we're actually not going to launch until we've built this cluster, because we feel like we need this cluster of opportunities to have a coherent first product.
Do you find that there's a risk of sticking with one opportunity for too long? Is there a point where you're like, no, we need to get some more opportunities going, like let's try and move that one away?
Yeah, this is part of why you're continuously interviewing, because as you're evaluating solutions and building solutions for a target opportunity, you want to continue to be exploring in your interviews. Did you fully address that opportunity? Is there more work to be done there? And that's really what's going to give you an indicator of you satisfied this enough, it's time to move on to the next opportunity.
Thanks. Any advice on how you'd apply your techniques to new product discovery?
Yeah, so I would say, like I said at the beginning, I've worked with teams that are 2-person founders before they have a product, all the way to super mature products that have been around for decades. The primary difference to start this process that I just introduced, you need to have a theory of who your customer is, and you need to have a theory of what your value proposition is for them. You don't have to know what the product is going to be, right? So I could say my target customers are going to be podcasters, and the value I'm going to deliver them is I'm going to help them grow their audience. I have no idea how I'm going to do that. I don't know what that product looks like, but I have a theory of my customer and the value proposition. So based on that, I can set an outcome. Maybe I want to increase the audience size for my customers, and I can start interviewing and learning about what are their needs, pain points, and desires related to growing their audience, and I can start exploring potential solutions.
Thank you. Unfortunately, everyone submitted them anonymously. Oh, as I say that, literally, Basim, thank you for adding something that wasn't anonymous. So I can't credit who this question goes to, but I think it's a great one. And it's the next highest voted one, which is, how should we think about accountability across the product trio as it relates to defining opportunities and solutions during the product discovery process?
Yeah, so this is true cross-functional collaboration feels really foreign to how a lot of business works, right? In a lot of business, we fall to our silos. We have a decision maker. We have somebody who's solely accountable for something. I think a lot of these concepts are really are what creates barriers to truly collaborating. So until you've worked in a trio, it's a little bit hard to imagine what it's like. But all three roles are accountable. They are equally jointly responsible for driving your outcome. And people ask me all the time, like, well, how does this really work? What do you do when you disagree? A lot of disagreements come from the trio drawing from different knowledge. Maybe the designer's interviewed customers and the product manager hasn't. Maybe the engineer has all this archaic technical knowledge that nobody else has. I didn't mean archaic to be pejorative there. Right? And so they're all making the decision from a different perspective. When you do your discovery together, you're going to have a much stronger shared knowledge base, and you're going to see a lot of those disagreements are going to fall by the wayside. They're not going to go away entirely. You're going to have to do some assumption testing to work through differences, but decision-making radically changes when you're working from a shared knowledge base. So I know it's so counter to like everything you may have ever experienced in business, but for the people listening that have been a part of a trio, it really goes much smoother than you think. The accountability is much smoother than you think. And on this topic, because I know so many people have not had the experience of working in a trio, I've been recording short, like 5-minute videos, just tackling some of the most common questions about working in a trio. And you can find those at producttalk.org.
Amazing.
So we've got someone here who said their trio consists of a PO, a technology lead, and a delivery lead. How important do you think it is to have a design lead within that trio?
It depends. So I do want to see all three roles represented in the vast majority of cases. If you don't have a full-time dedicated designer on your team and like your design resources are shared, if you put that designer on your trio, you're now going to go really slow because they're going to be a bottleneck. So again, remember the trio concept can flex based on the roles available to you. In an ideal world, a designer would be involved in as many discovery decisions as possible. But if that's going to slow you way down, you got to do the best you can with what you have.
It looks like that was a popular question. The next question down was also about someone who doesn't have a design lead. So it's obviously something that people might start thinking about pushing for.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess linked to that, I mean, I think our audience primarily is going to be PMs and people, product owners. Is there any tips you've got as to how they can help in the design process when they don't have a dedicated designer?
Yeah, if you're pulling from shared design resources, I think I would just start with building those relationships and see if you can get some of their time earlier in the process. So even if you're not a dedicated trio where there's this formal relationship of this designer is assigned to you full time, you can still invite them to participate earlier. And the vast majority of designers are going to love that and want that.
Sounds good. Thank you. So next one, and please do keep the questions coming in. It's great. Any tips for applying these techniques for internal products where you've got a much smaller user base and it's hard to get quick quantitative or qualitative feedback?
Yeah, what's great about internal customers is that you should have more access to them, right? Because they're your colleagues. And actually with internal customers, we can actually observe their work. So I often talk about good, better, best when we talk about our discovery techniques. So interviewing every week, especially like a virtual interview, is good. It allows you to interview a wide diversity of people. You can do it every week. It's sustainable. Better would be to interview in person, right? Where you get a little more body language and context and it's easier to build rapport. It's less sustainable because you can't do it every week. Best would be to go to where your customers are, observe them in the moment, but we definitely can't do that every week. But if your customers are internal, you can observe them much more frequently. So there's huge advantages to your customers being internal. You might have to chip away at some organizational barriers to get their time, to get access to them. And this is where I would start teeny tiny. Don't start with the leader of that team and say, hey, I need regular access to your team, because that's going to turn it into a big giant project. Find one person on that team and take them to lunch, right? That's obviously easier to do when we're in the office, but do a virtual lunch with them. So start small and just think about all the same methods apply when they're internal. You have a huge advantage because it's probably easier to get in touch with them, but you might have to adapt the methods a little bit. You might not recruit them while they're using your product or service. You might have to recruit them in your Slack community or in your MS Teams community.
Yeah, that's a really cool idea of being able to go grab someone. Like if it's internal, you can just go grab someone, take them for lunch, or just grab 5 minutes of their time a lot easier than a customer that you might have to set up a web chat with or whatever else. You might have to go a bit further afield. That's pretty cool. Next question. How big a chunk of a work do you typically imagine a solution to a leaf node opportunity in the OST to be?
Yeah, so let's talk about the terms here. So we didn't get into this very much in the talk, but when you map the opportunity space using the tree structure, you're going to have parent opportunities that are going to have children that are going to have children. So a leaf node opportunity is an opportunity that has no children. It's at the bottom of the opportunity space on your tree. I always want to see a team choose a leaf node opportunity as their target opportunity. And the reason for this is as you work your way down the tree, your opportunities are getting smaller and smaller because a child partially solves a parent. We could spend a whole hour on this. This is the rough idea. So the reason why you're working on a leaf node opportunity is that's what's going to help you find small chunks of value that you can deliver quickly. So the way that I like to think about this is that we're trying to get to a continuous delivery cadence. So your opportunity should be small enough that you're finding a piece of work that you can chip away at in a week or two. And if you're finding that it's like a month worth of work, you probably have sub opportunities that you haven't identified that allows you to find a smaller chunk of work to get started on. And this doesn't mean you're only working on low-hanging fruit. It means you're taking your hard, meaty, evergreen problems and you're deconstructing them into smaller and smaller pieces so that you can start chipping away at them over time. This is the heart of the agile mindset of finding iterative cycles for building value. The tree structure will help you find that. It does take practice.
Cool. Sorry, I was just looking at all the questions coming in. But thank you. Sorry, caught me napping. I think this hopefully is answered. But how do you choose which customers to co-create with? Do you change them regularly, or do you stay with the same set? I mean, I'm guessing this depends a bit on the product. You sort of talked about this with the advisory board, but how fresh is good?
Yeah, so who do you choose to work with depends on what you're trying to learn, right? So think about it as your customers are on a journey. Which part of that journey are you working on? You want to interview the customers where that part of the journey is most relevant to them. So another way to think about this is don't interview once you've identified an opportunity and you're exploring solutions, don't run your assumption tests with people who don't have that need or pain point because you're going to get garbage data. So you want to make sure that your assumption tests are with people who are experiencing the opportunity that you're working on. And then do you change this regularly or do you stay with the same set? There's actually advantages to both. So even in the advisory board example, you don't want to just talk to the same people over time. The advantage of talking to the same people is that you get to learn how their needs, pain points, and desires change over time. And you get a really rich understanding of their context, and that's amazing. The downside of it is if your market is large and you're only talking to a subset of your customers, you're going to run the risk of building a product that doesn't work for the whole market. So you also want to interview for variation. So talk to big customers, small customers, active customers, less active customers, underrepresented minorities, etc. There's lots of ways to think about diversity and variation. And you want to mix and match both methods. So you want to have some people you engage with over time, and you want to have some people you're engaging with for variation. However, if you're just getting started, just find a customer to talk to. Getting into this variation is sort of like step 2 and 3. Just start by talking to the easiest person to talk to.
One customer is better than no customers. Got it. Cool.
Thanks to everyone, by the way, who's submitting questions, who's upvoting questions. We've got time for a few more, so make sure that you get onto the Slido just to make sure you can upvote the ones that you think are most important, because there's loads of really good ones in there. Speaking of, the next one is, so how do you know whether or not your continuous delivery is succumbing to the build trap?
Yeah, good question. I'm going to give a shout out to Melissa Perry, who wrote Escaping the Build Trap. The idea here is that you don't want to become a feature factory, right? You're just churning out stuff to build because you have engineers waiting. The best way to avoid this is to measure the impact of what you're building against your outcome, right? So being outcome focused is a great way to break this. Sadly, a lot of the things that we build fall short of our expectations, and it's because we're not doing enough assumption testing. So a really good way to make sure your delivery is on track is to measure the impact of every single thing that you release against your outcome. And that last 2 words is critical, because I see teams cherry picking metrics. They release something, they find a number that went up, they call it a success. You're measuring impact against your outcome.
Yeah, I'm just slightly smiling because I wonder if I've been guilty of that. But yeah, safe space, right? Safe space. Cool. Next question. How do you apply this technique when you're trying to decide whether to build or buy something to create the desired outcome? An interesting one.
Yeah, great question. So I actually like to use Big Surprise and Opportunity Solution Tree for this as well. If you have a really good understanding of the opportunity space, what you can do is take a product you're considering buying and break it down into all of its little features and try to map them to the opportunity space. And you can get a sense for, if we buy this, how much of the opportunity space does it address? And is that adequate? Or are we seeing that it addresses some of the opportunity space, but not the most critical parts? By the way, this is also a great way to do a competitive analysis. You can take your competitors' products and map them to your opportunity space and get a sense for, hey, where can we differentiate? Where are our competitors falling short? So there's a lot of power in, if you have a really rich understanding of the opportunity space, it's going to help you understand which solutions are adequate and where there's gaps in the market.
Do you have any... Oh, that one disappeared. So next question. Have you experienced teams that do frequent research getting overwhelmed with what they don't know, getting stuck in the weeds and not being able to ship?
Yeah, this was a little bit of my comment about research for research's sake. So I see this actually quite a bit, especially at companies that have invested heavily in UX and user research resources. So first of all, I'm not dissing UX or user research by this comment. We need more UX designers and more user researchers at all companies. However, if you're not being driven by an outcome, it's easy to fall into this trap of there's always another customer to talk to. There's always another test we can run. And here's the reality. If you are not shipping value on a regular basis, you are not doing your job. It's that simple. We create value for our business when we create value for a customer by shipping code week over week that's driving our outcome. So if that's not happening, you got to refocus on outcomes. It's not about talking to customers just because it's fun, right? It's not about creating personas and customer journeys because it's fun playing with stickies. It is about driving an outcome. So if you find that your team is spinning their wheels, I think it helps to just step back and say, hey, remember, we're trying to focus on this outcome. What have we done lately that has impacted that?
Cool. Sounds like a good idea. So one final question before we let you disappear to the rest of your day. Someone said, even with recruitment automation, there's work paying fees, getting diversity, handling dropouts. Who handles this? Is it the trio or the PM? And do you have any more automation tips?
Yeah, I want to tackle this. And if it's okay, I would love to tackle the next one too, because I actually think it's a really important question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so with interviewing, we now talk about product operations and design operations. I'm just going to call it discovery operations. There is infrastructure that you need to have in place to help support this process, right? You need to figure out how to automate the recruiting process. It's going to take experimentation. It's going to take iteration. You're not going to just build something that's going to magically work. So you have to take a product mindset to how you automate the recruiting process. We talked about recruiting people in your service, in your product or service. You can use scheduling software to pair with that. You do have to figure out incentives and how to deliver incentives. So think about it as a whole customer journey in your product that you have to optimize. And there's lots of components to this. If we had more, again, we could do a whole nother hour just on automating your recruiting process. There's more details in the book, and we do go into more detail in our continuous interviewing course. So we do have deep dive courses on a lot of these skills at the Product Talk Academy, which you can find at learn.producttalk.org if you want to learn more about this.
Fantastic. Now, you said you wanted to handle the other one. I think this is the can we drop personas question.
Yes. So I would love to talk about personas because I actually think there are ethical reasons to move beyond personas. So one of the ideas that I share in the book is that I encourage teams to create an interview snapshot for every interview that you conduct. This is just a one-page template that summarizes what you learned from that single interview. So it looks like a persona template, but it's not a generalization across interviews. It's helping you synthesize what you learned from each interview. The opportunity space on your opportunity solution tree is where you're going to synthesize across interviews. I actually think it's really important that we move beyond personas. And because when we create personas, we're generalizing across populations. And most humans, when we generalize, we fall back to stereotypes. We overlook underrepresented minorities. This is a lot of the reasons why we end up excluding people, usually unintentionally, but the impact is we're leaving people out. Whereas if you think about every customer as a unique person, and you do your synthesis at the unique person level, it makes it a lot easier to remember, hey, we're always serving our large enterprise customers and we're leaving out our mom and pop customers. Or hey, we're always serving this population that represents the majority and we're not serving this population that represents the minority. So I do think this is a topic that I'm going to be diving way more into over the next year. I do think it's time that we move beyond personas and remember that our customers are people.
Awesome answer. So thank you ever so much, both to everyone who's asked questions and to yourself for not only giving us a fantastic talk, but also answering those questions and covering a lot of questions. That was some impressive quick fire responses, which covered everything, which was really awesome. So I think all that really remains from us is to say thank you so much for joining us. And if you are interested in watching Product Tank Exeter again, we have hopefully got an event coming up in September. So watch this space. We're hoping we've got a very exciting guest, but we are waiting to confirm that. So do check back in with us. You can find us on Meetup and make sure that you buy Teresa's book, available on Amazon, and also you can get it on Kindle as well, which is what I've done. So I'm partway through and very much enjoying getting to grips with it. So I recommend giving that a read. So thank you everyone for joining us. And I think with that, we can say goodbye and thanks again.
Thanks everyone for the great questions.
Thanks everyone.